Good evening. It seems that every day there's a new story about how our kids continue to lag internationally behind their peers in basic disciplines like math and reading. And not surprisingly, there are a number of reasons offered up for this situation and twice as many proposed solutions. Tonight, our panelists will look at the education challenges here in California from four different perspectives. Larry Sand, he is a former teacher, founder and president of the California Teachers Empowerment Network. He's going to address alternative solutions to traditional government-run schools. His group is a nonpartisan, non-political group that provides teachers and the general public with reliable and balanced information about professional affiliation and positions on educational issues. Gloria Romero is a retired California State Senator and President of Democrats for Education Reform. And she will discuss the legislative and political environment under which various reform ideas and plans are discussed. As State Senator, she authored the Parents' Trigger Law that allows the majority of parents in a failing school to vote on a method to restructure the school, including replacing the principal, half the personnel, teachers, staff, and even shutting down the school. Seven states apparently have adopted similar legislation, and there's 20 more who are considering doing the same thing. Dean Vogel is president of the California Teachers Association, and he's going to present the view from the teachers, from the folks who work in the trenches. He believes that if you want to know how a child learns to read, ask a teacher, not a bureaucrat. Makes sense to me. He also believes that by improving educators' working conditions, the union can improve the learning conditions of all students. So Terry Moe, he's a Stanford professor and Hoover scholar, and we'll talk about technology's impact on education. Professor Moe appears on radio and TV, and is author of many books and articles, and he's a member of the Hoover Institution's K-12 Education Task Force. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, and thank you all for coming tonight. Hopefully you'll find this enlightening and interesting. My topic is the alternate solutions to traditional government-run schools, but before I get into what those alternatives are, I think I should try to answer the question, why do we need solutions? Excuse me?
Microphone.
1, 2, 3, 4? Okay. Okay, why do we need solutions? To start with, in 2013, 2014, in California, we're going to be spending $57 billion, with a B, dollars on education, which is 58% of general fund expenditures. What this translates to per child is not what you think. In LA, we talk about maybe $10,000 per child. It's not true, it's more like $20,000. What's the difference? School districts don't report capital expenses like the school buildings in which students learn. Because we don't educate students in the field or on the beach or on a mountaintop, we educate them in buildings, so these buildings need to be part of the per student number. My time. Anyway, 20,000 per student, not the 10 that you hear in all school districts across the country basically lie about this number. Nationally, we spend 3 times what we spent in 1970, and that's correcting for inflation, yet our NAEP scores are flat. In California, our spending has doubled in the last 40 years, and we are not near the bottom in national testing. The dropout rate in California, we hear the number 30%, but we're not really sure what the numbers mean because everybody comes with a certain spin on this issue. For example, you might not know that when high school dropouts the rate is mentioned, they're not talking about middle school dropouts. Yes, there's students who don't go to high school, period. So technically they haven't dropped into high school, so we can't count them as dropouts. But yet they are still dropouts, and we must acknowledge this. Yet the spinmeisters will not do this. Also, students, the tough kids who have to go to a county school, like a last chance farm kind of situation, If they drop out of a public school, a district school, go to that county school, that is not counted as a dropout. So don't believe the numbers you hear. I don't know what the reality is, but my guess is at least 33% in the state. And that is inexcusable. Why do we need traditional solutions to traditional government-run schools? Those students who graduate high school and go on to college in California, 30% who go to the formerly vaunted UC system need remediation, 60% in the Cal State system, and an unbelievable 90% of students need remediation who go to the county and city colleges in California. This is costing the taxpayers, I'm forgetting about the poor education we're giving our students. Taxpayers are paying twice because they're paying for the K through 12, and then they're paying for the remediation also. We need traditions to government-run schools because government-run schools run on tenure, basically 2 years in California, a teacher has a job for life, seniority, which means that if I'm a mediocre teacher and you're a teacher of the year, but I got hired the day before you did, layoffs come, you get laid off, I get to keep my job. This is not a way to run a school system. It's almost impossible to get rid of a bad teacher, let alone a pedophile. Eric Hanushek at the Hoover Institution, where Terry is housed, said that if we could get rid of 5 to 7% of the bottom performing teachers, please, I'm not teacher bashing, I'm a former teacher, but teaching needs to be considered like any other profession. There are wonderful teachers, there are good teachers, there are mediocre teachers, and there are stinkers. We need to get rid of the stinkers. Hanushek says 5 to 7%. If we got rid of them, we could have a world-class system like Finland. Let's look at what this 5 to 7% means. If we take 6% of the number of teachers in California, which is about 300,000, that's 18,000 teachers who should not be in the classroom. If we multiply that by 25 kids in a class, we have 450,000 school children in California who are getting a rotten education every year. This is why we need solutions to traditional government-run schools. We need choice in California. The government has a monopoly on education. We have education by zip code. If you wanted to go out to have dinner tonight, and I said, okay, we're going to have to go to the restaurant down the street from where you live. You say, no, there's a better restaurant a mile away with better food and better service. That's where I'm going. And I say, okay. But when we're talking about schools, you can't do that. You've got to send your kid to your school down your street. Even if it's a bad school. This is not a way to run a school system. This is not a good thing to do to our children. Steve Jobs, here we are in Silicon Valley, how apt, said that when he was a kid, he saw a bumper sticker which said, we're the phone company, we don't care, we don't have to. Those of you who are of a certain age, like mine, know what I'm talking about. Back in the day, the phone company was a monopoly and you had no choice. You went with AT&T and you had a black phone. That was it. When you have a monopoly, you don't have to care. And it's true in telephones and it's true in education. Now we do have some choice in California. We have, courtesy of Gloria Romero, we have the Parent Trigger and the Open Enrollment Act, which you will be talking about. And we do have online learning opportunities, and Terry's going to go into that. We do have homeschooling. About 175,000, 200,000 children are homeschooled in California. But even that hit a snag a few years ago. It was almost derailed by a court ruling, ultimately overturned, thankfully, that said parents have to have a teaching credential to homeschool. I said, fortunately, that was overturned. This would have been, talk about government overreach. Goodness. We do have over 1,000 charter schools in California. A charter school, very simply, is a public school that doesn't have to go by all the rules and regulations of a traditional public school. They don't have to go by the monstrous ed code we have. But even there, we're curtailed because we can only add 100 a year because the special interests do not want us to add too many charter schools because it threatens their special interests. The good thing about charter schools, if they don't do their job, they close. Unlike a traditional public school, they don't do their job, we throw more money at the failing system. Now, there have been some studies, I fault their methodology, and a lot of people do, in fact, that say that charter schools don't do a better job than traditional public schools. Even if that were true, charter schools are doing the same job and they're doing it for less money, to 80 to 90% on the dollar, 80 to 90 cents on the dollar in traditional public schools. So even if they're not doing a better job, we need more charter schools because they're doing it for less money. Most importantly, we need more vouchers in this country. We have, at this point, we have 18 programs in 12 states and DC, but it's limited to certain kids, and we don't have any in California. When I say limited to certain kids, we have maybe special needs kids or kids who are living in poverty have a chance through a voucher to get a better education. The ultimate is in Sweden. Now I know this is humorous, especially to this group, because we know Sweden is essentially a socialist country. Yet they have a system whereby a kid starts in a public school, and at any point that parent decides that public school isn't doing a good job, parent can pull them out and put them in another public school or the private school of their choosing, and the money follows the child. That's the important part. And it's working so well that even the socialists like the privatization factor. How ironic is that? The special interests are going to tell you that, oh no, it siphons money from public schools. Well, yes it does, but it siphons kids also, so what's the difference? You still have the same per pupil funding. You know, maybe you have 70% of the funding and you have 70% of the kids, so there's no net loss for the kids who stay in public schools. Most importantly, where vouchers have been instituted, public schools have gotten better. Competition works, even in education, amazingly. There have been 10 studies done. 9 of them have shown where vouchers have been instituted, public education has improved because competition works. There was one study that showed no difference. Said that there was no change in how the public schools did. So the overwhelming evidence is that vouchers do a better job and they do it cheaper, and I cannot say this enough because competition works in education just like it works in every other part of American society. And this is something we need to strive for. I'll just talk very briefly now about tax credit scholarships. Are becoming very popular, and this is where companies, corporations, and even individuals can give to a certain organization that will dole the money out to students. Now, this isn't, as somebody wrote the other day, corporate welfare. This is a way to direct funds, to direct tax monies. Corporations are not making out on tax credit scholarships, they're just pointing their tax money toward a certain, in a certain direction, which will help students to go to a private school. Okay, and then we have education savings accounts, which basically give parents a similar type choice. I'm just about out of time. I will talk more about this when I have during the 5-minute period. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'm Gloria Romero, and it's an honor to be with you this evening. It's my first time also at the Conservative Forum. And for the record, let me just go ahead and say I'm a Democrat. I'm a liberal Democrat. I represented East Los Angeles when I was in the California State Senate. And for the record, I am a member of my teachers' union. In fact, I am affiliated with the California Teachers Association. So, Dean, you are my president. I often lamented, though, that many times I would see my union dues in the form of lobbying and political contributions that ran contrary to where I think we need to take reform and change in the state of California. I'm a product of public education. My mother had a 6th grade level of education, but she understood that education is the key to the American dream. It's what lifts you out of poverty. And I was one of those kids that grew up on the other side of the tracks. My counselor told me I was not college material. Well, fast forward. When I got to the Senate, I was given the prison committee. Nobody wanted that. And I will tell you, if you have any doubt about the importance of the public education system and the need for reform in the public education system, visit our state penitentiary. I have been in virtually every prison in the state of California for nothing that I myself have done. Let me just make that clear. And I believe in personal responsibility. But When 70% of inmates do not have a high school diploma, we have to do the math. And it disturbed me as well, because when I looked at our state prison system, in the juvenile justice system and in the state prison system, we spend more to incarcerate inmates than we do to educate children. We also find that it is primarily poor, black, and brown. Too many of my constituents from East LA were sent to the big house. If we do not educate, we will incarcerate. And so serving in leadership in the Senate, Democratic Caucus Chair, Majority Leader, I said, I'm going to walk away from leadership. I want to head up the Education Committee, because one thing that I think we've been lacking in California is the sense of urgency. Not waiting for tomorrow, not waiting for the money to come. And I believe that we need more funding in our education system. But if we're going to spend that money in the same old way, that's the definition of insanity. We need reform, we need transformation, we need to reinvent public education. We can't have a great state if we don't have great schools. And teachers matter. Teachers are the #1 factor in the success of a child. But what we've seen in California, and what I saw firsthand in fighting for reforms, is that California has an education code, and Larry addressed this, that has too many barriers and obstacles. We can't have a great state, we lose economic prosperity, and also, given the demography of our state and who's in our public education system, it's a civil rights issue. This is the civil rights issue of our time. Over 50% of children in our public education system are Latino children. And when we have a bureaucracy and a vested status quo interest, and the intransigence just saying, we don't want to change because the rules favor the adults. It's a public works program more than it is a public education program. And so how do we turn this around? A sense of urgency, a willing to take on the system, a willing to not nibble at the edges. Reform is not for the weak-hearted. We've got to have the sense of urgency, and I think it's one where we should just set aside the ideological divide. I step forward as a Democrat to say I'm going to join with Republicans and independents and anybody who will join with me, because this is a civil rights fight. But for the grace of God, I'd be one of those kids in California that tests well below basic levels of proficiency in California. So what did I do? I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, as that phrase goes. As chair of Education Committee, I would see the lists that our own State Department of Education would produce. They're called watch lists. And it's like watching paint, it never changes. The same schools representing millions of kids in California, identified by the State Department as basically being underperforming, I'm just going to say failing schools. And based on numbers, and yes, it's imperfect, but you know what? Let's not getting to perfection be the obstacle that says we can't make change because it's not perfect. I've never seen a perfect law, and yet we continue to fight. So I began to say, look, if the bureaucrats are content with not using the laws that exist under federal law and change and transform these schools where millions of kids are being destined to lives where they will not take their place in a domestic economy, much less an international economy, then basically get the hell out of the way and give the power to the parents. Because we, the parents, should have the right to petition our government. That's the foundation of democracy. We, the people, with my John Hancock, I am going to turn around a stagnant and failed system that has sat there on these watch lists, even though adults in charge of the system have the power, have the legal right to make the change. They just never did. It's like waiting for Godot. Godot never comes. So I wrote this little law. And at the time I wrote it, I never had any idea that this would be hailed by the Wall Street Journal as the most revolutionary law transforming education. I had no idea that some 20, 30 state legislatures would implement some version, try to implement some version of the law. Today we have 7 states in the nation that have copied that little law that I wrote. I was in Texas last week, meeting with Democratic senators, Latino senators. You know what? We're going to get a strong parent trigger law in the state of Texas. Georgia has passed something. Tennessee is looking at this. That little law. And I did it by basically saying, I want to have legislators who are not afraid of taking on the status quo and doing the right thing for kids and for parents who are trapped by accident of birth, by the size of their wallet on which side of the tracks they happen to live on. You know, I looked at this flyer that's on your seats. The first thing that's here says, you know, why do you live in Los Gatos? Good schools. Well, what happens if you can't afford to live in those good schools? And we know which the good schools are. Then you're trapped. That's not democracy. That's not right. Anybody, regardless of political ideology, should reject that. So what I did was I said, I'm going to give parents choice. I wrote the parent trigger law. Basically, 50% of parents in a school that's failing, you get together, you organize, and you basically say, we the people, we're going to choose one of the options under federal law, and we're going to make the change. And at first, you know what? It was fought. The unions fought. The teachers' unions fought this. I couldn't understand it. I argued with the head of SEIU, which represents the classified workers. I pay my dues to SEIU as well. And I said, you know what? I mean, these are parents who clean toilets for a living, scrub floors. You really think that they enjoy cleaning toilets just to clean toilets? They're fighting for the futures of their kids. My father worked as a janitor once. He fought for me to have the right to go to at least get an education. And so we were able to beat back the opposition. Beat it back. A rare moment in Sacramento when you can get this motley crew of Republicans and independents, there was one, and Democrats, a few of us, willing to take on even my own party, I'm ashamed to say, and to join hands with the President of the United States, President Obama, who I support, who called for a race to the top, signed by a Republican governor, brought forward by a bipartisan group of legislators to say, no more business as usual in California, and this nation has never been the same. So I look forward to having a conversation and bringing about solutions that bring us together. I don't care what your politics are. This is about kids, it's about the economic foundation of this great state, and it's a civil rights fight. And when we park our politics at the door, I think we can come together and do what's right for education in California. Thank you.
So how's this microphone right about like this? Can you hear me? So I'm Dean Vogel. I'm a kindergarten teacher from Vacaville. And the president of the California Teachers Association. I will tell you, there's nobody in my life more surprised by the fact that I'm the president than me. Because my belief the whole time was that I was just trying to be the best teacher I could be. And I'm still trying to be the best teacher I can be. And I want to talk a little bit about just what we believe. When I say we, I'm speaking for classroom teachers. I'm speaking for the folks that are doing the work every single day. And both of my panelists here are saying a lot of things that are actually real and serious considerations that have to be held by all of us. The real challenge is, how do we hold them? How do we identify the argument? How do we engage it? How do we find the common ground that we got to stand on while we have that argument and debate? And then how do we move forward? And I'll tell you one thing that we haven't talked before this, we have a little bit of experience, but here's something we all agree upon. Like, if we want kids to be successful in classrooms, and this is pretty much bound by all of the research we look at, you got to have a quality teacher in front of kids. And if you don't have a quality teacher in front of kids, you're going to be in trouble. You got to put that teacher and those kids in a clean and safe environment. You got to give the teacher the resources necessary to get the work done. got to give that teacher the opportunity with her colleagues on a routine basis, hopefully on a daily basis, but weekly would do, or bi-weekly, to interact with her peers, her colleagues, trying to figure out, looking at data and student learning, how do we differentiate instruction? How do we be sure that we're doing the best thing that we can do every day in the classroom? That's where we start. Another thing that we know affects what happens in classrooms is the degree to which parents can actually engage in the school. Like a parent has a right to be right at the center of what's happening in schools. So conceptually, this whole idea of giving parents choice resonates with teachers. That's what teachers do. Teachers are with the kids and they're out there in the communities trying to draw people in. The question really becomes, what about where it doesn't happen like that? What do we do? What's the difference between schools and school communities where teachers are engaged with parents and everything's working, and those places where it's not? What are the obstacles? And our position would be, the very first place you look is that community and the dynamics of that community. What's blocking the teachers and the faculty of that school and the parents in that community from actually coming together and having the essential kind of conversations you got to have to move forward? Now, one of the things that the California Teachers Association did along that regard, and this was about 5 or 6 years ago, basically in settling a lawsuit with the governor of the state of California at the time, Governor Schwarzenegger, ended up with $3 billion of ongoing money. And we thought, what would happen if we went into these very, very troubled schools, and we identified about 1,800 of them, and we actually started putting that money into those schools with this intent. Empower the faculties that are working there to actually engage in conversations, to help one another understand what it is that they need, that they're not getting done. Bring parents into the school to help them understand that they really can be in a partnership with those teachers. Utilize existing structures, school site councils, to actually have the kind of conversations you've got to have to move forward. And then do it day in and day out, year in and year out. We're in the 6th year of that program, and what's happening is it's starting to be recognized all around the world as a very positive, substantive change. But we've got 10,000 schools in the state of California. And the QEIA program, Quality Education Investment Act, touched 450 of them. Now there's something wrong with that picture. And not just the 1,800 schools that are very, very troubled that the senator just outlined, but what about every single school? What about the schools that are actually in communities all over? Shouldn't every single school have that opportunity to get that kind of connection with the families? And here's the predicament as I see it. What we've been doing for so long is arguing with one another. It's almost like we draw a line in the sand, and then we spend our time trying to figure out how to neutralize the other, as opposed to drawing a circle around ourselves and saying, okay, where's the common ground that we stand on to have the conversations necessary to figure out where we go next? We've almost lost the ability in this state, in this country. You watch it when you watch the legislature. You see it when you watch it in Washington, D.C. There's so much almost obtrusive partisanship that the real essential time is spent trying to discredit the other, with very, very little time spent really trying to figure out where we're going to go next. Maybe I'm an optimist. Like I said, I'm a kindergarten teacher. But I have this belief that when people of goodwill, and I'm going to tell you what, I give you all the benefit of the doubt, we are people of goodwill. We want to do the right thing for our kids. If we can come together with this belief that even if we disagree, even if we have differences of opinion about how much money we should be spending, or on what that money should be spent on, or what's the role of the union in schools, or What are we going to do about government schools, as my friend on the corner was calling them? Even with differences of opinion, if we can learn how to behave civilly and actually work toward common ground, I believe we can get that done. Another thing that the Teachers Association has been trying to do is actually get down into the buildings, get down into standing with teachers and talking with them about what is it that you really need. And you know, it's really interesting. When I'm talking with teachers, and I talk with teachers a lot, they say things like, you know, there's so much testing going on in our schools. I'm almost losing the opportunity that I thought I was going to have to really provide this rich, comprehensive curriculum. And you know, I'm hearing that from kindergarten teachers the same way I'm hearing it from 5th grade teachers or high school teachers. It's like something has happened as we've been rushing to embrace reform that has kind of taken us off track. When I ask parents, what do you think we need to do? One of the first things I hear is, how come we're testing kids so much? And how come my 2nd graders getting an upset stomach at school? You know, those are not questions I'm making up. And I can tell by the recognition reflex I'm seeing in the group that you guys are hearing it too. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be testing kids. I've never met a teacher that doesn't test kids. You know, but those tests should be relevant and developmentally appropriate. And they should be giving teachers the information that they need to differentiate instruction, to plan lessons, to do the kinds of things that faculties do together. And we've kind of lost our way because we've been so gung-ho about we've got to do reform, we've got to do reform. One of the things I've been asking people is, do you think it might be helpful just to take a step back and look at what we're really trying to get done and then figure out how do we put our heads together to do that effectively? Because we can sit here and argue all we want, but until we actually do the work together, we're in trouble. I have tremendous hope. Because I've been traveling around the state, one of the things that's really different about my job now, when I was teaching kindergarten, I wasn't traveling anywhere, except back and forth to school. But now I'm in lots of rooms like this, talking to citizens about how do we make public education the reality that it was meant to be? How do we make it free and hopeful for communities? There's a way to get that done, by bringing us all together. And I really believe that that's what's living in communities everywhere, and that's what's living in rooms like this. And to the degree that we can come together, we can get that done.
Hi, I'm Terry Moe from Stanford University. Great to be here. You know, in this country we've been trying to reform the schools and significantly improve them for the past 30 years, ever since the nation at risk in 1983. Relatively speaking, today is a really exciting time. I mean, things are happening.
I can't hear you very well.
So,
you move the microphone towards you, maybe? Thank you, Dean.
all right. So, we're seeing many states passing laws that require that teachers be evaluated based on performance. Charter schools are growing in number. People are actually talking about trying to get bad teachers out of the classroom. You know, so I mean, these are exciting developments. Democrats, not all of them, but more than in the past by a long shot, like Gloria, like President Obama and Arnie Duncan, like Cory Booker, Rahm Emanuel, have been standing up and saying, look, we're just not going to do this anymore. You know, we are going to stand up for children and do things that the unions don't like. And in the past, that didn't happen. And it is happening now. So, things are improving. Now, the downside is, it's been 30 years. And what? We're saying that teachers should be evaluated based on performance? This is like some kind of a joke. Right? Why didn't they do this 30 years ago? It's done everywhere else in the economy. Why isn't it done in the schools? Why are we now saying, yeah, we're going to hold schools accountable for actually teaching kids something? Why weren't they doing that before? You know, and so now we're trying to do it, and we're thinking, man, we're really making progress. This is pathetic.
Yes.
Right, it's really pathetic. So what we're doing, really, is making incremental progress. And that is good. But it is not great. So, I'm here to talk about a revolution that's actually coming. Because it's not coming from this stuff. This stuff is good, and I'm glad that it's happening. But there is a real revolution happening, and it's coming from technology. It's happening under the radar screen. Most people don't talk about it. But the fact is, there is a revolution in information technology that started some time ago. It is shaping the fundamentals of human society everywhere in the world. It's changing the way people do business, the way they interact with one another, the way they get information, the way they get knowledge. And it can't help but transform the way children learn, the way teachers teach, the way schools are organized, and it is going to revolutionize K-12 education, and it will revolutionize higher education too. Not just in this country, but everywhere in the world. It is really going to happen, and nothing's going to stop it. This is a tsunami that is too big for anybody to stop. All right, so why is this a good thing? Well, what we've always really wanted is to have a personalized kind of education where every child can be treated as an individual. And ironically, a computer can do that. You know, you still need teachers, right? Flesh and blood teachers. But with a computer, the child is having a one-to-one interaction with the computer, or with algebra, or whatever it is. The computer is teaching that child, and that child is moving at her own pace through the material. If the child doesn't know something, the computer knows the child doesn't know something. The computer can give that child remedial help right then, and go through the kinds of material that the child needs. The child can move through and at some point finishes the entire thing, right? It might take 5 months for that child to learn the first semester of algebra. It might take 5 weeks. Under the current system, that child sits in a chair for however many months it is to finish the semester. It's stupid, right? But with online learning, when the material is learned, it's over, and the child moves on. It's just such a beautiful thing, and we've never been able to do this before, and now we can do it, right? And this is just the beginning. That they're just starting to provide these kinds of software programs, but already they're incredibly powerful. Think of what they'll be like in 10 years or 20 years. It's amazing. Okay, also, this is a huge boost for social equity. Because the computer doesn't care whether you're white or black, or male or female, or if you live in Detroit, right? You can have access to the best. This is unbelievable. Nothing like this has ever been true before. It's so exciting. It's going to change everything. And what this is really about is substituting technology for labor, right? And it's not getting rid of teachers. We still need teachers. We just don't need as many of them, because a lot of this can be done by computers, right? So I think in the future, kids will go to school, you know, and they'll take whatever, 70%, 80% of their coursework on the computer, but there will be teachers there, and they'll still have art and PE and music and those kinds of things, not on the computer probably. Right? But the computers will do a lot, and there will be a massive substitution of technology for labor. And technology is cheap, labor is very expensive, and this has huge implications for the cost and our ability to afford a quality education. And this is the kind of thing that has driven productivity in every industry throughout human history. But it's never affected education. Education has always been a teacher in front of a classroom, and if you talk to people at education schools, at least up until very recently, they'll say, well, it'll always be that way. No, it won't. It's not true anymore. Now we can do this. So this is the future. All right, what does it look like right now? Right now, there are virtual charter schools, and those charter schools can enroll kids anywhere in a state. And this is a source of huge dynamism. There are firms that are in this sector, and they are generating whole curricula. They run whole schools for whole states, and more smart people are getting involved in this. They're developing mind-blowing, innovative curricula, ways of doing this, and this is a field that is just taking off. Now there are 275,000 kids around the country who are in these virtual charter schools. There are also state-led virtual schools. These are agencies run by states, but some of the states have good ones. The Florida virtual school is just a beacon of innovation. It's huge. They have 300,000 enrollments per year. They're teaching lots of kids throughout Florida with AP courses and remedial education courses and whole curricula. They're unbelievable. They're doing consulting throughout the world and throughout the country. And the reason that thing, well, okay, I'll talk about why it exists later. I don't think either one of these is the path to the future. The future is going to be blended learning, I think, where you have schools that are, people don't take a whole curriculum at home in their bedrooms. Most people don't want to homeschool their kids. They want their kids to go to school. So I think in the future, most kids will go to school. And when they're there, they'll take 80% of their coursework online, probably. There will be teachers, there will be other kids, and so on. And computers, then, will be an important part of it. Rocket ship, which is close by here, is now nationally renowned as a blended learning model. It has a constituency of kids who are, as far as I know, 100% low income. They're almost all Hispanic, and they're just beating the daylights out of all the other kids in San Jose in terms of test scores. And statewide, for that matter. Rocket Ship has been a huge success. So they just got authorization for 20 more schools in the area. They run 7 right now. They're going to start 8 more in Milwaukee. And they plan to spread to 50 more cities. This is a huge thing. And I think the wave of the future. All right, so I don't have much time left, 30 seconds exactly. So I'll just say these are huge developments, and as you might expect, they are being opposed. And the reason they're being opposed is that they are a threat to jobs. This is all about substituting technology for labor, and what the unions don't want is for technology to be substituted for labor. They want the education system to be as labor intensive as possible, right? And so they have done everything they can around the country to minimize the advance of technology, and they have been partially successful. As a result, this thing is going to be much slower than it would otherwise be, but the end result is going to be a total revolution. Thank you.
Now we're going to start the 5-minute rebuttal period, starting with Larry and then moving on down.
Okay, thank you. Very interestingly, when CTA posted on its website yesterday information about this event today, it referred to Terry, Gloria, and I as reformers with quotes around it. That, in other words, we're not really reformers. And then listen to Mr. Vogel talk, and I think I understand it, because I think Mr. Vogel, what I understood him to say is that we need more money in education. He talked about QEIA, the Quality Education Investment Act. I taught for, I should mention, 28 and a half years. Toward the end of my career, we got, we were the recipient of KIA money.
And what we did is my school went out and got more assistant principals and counselors and deans and God knows what. We just had a bunch of adults working there. Unfortunately, the school really didn't get any better. Throwing money in a bad situation makes it a more expensive bad situation. That's why voting in Prop 30, and my guess is there's not one person in this room, or at least sitting out there, who voted for Prop 30. You got no change for your buck. What will change things, you want to hear reform, there's a lawsuit called Students Matter. And it's going to trial on January 27th of next year. And if this thing flies, it was started by a venture capitalist right here in Silicon Valley by the name of David Welch, maybe some of you know or know of him. Students Matter would take tenure, seniority, and the dismissal statutes out of the Ed Code. It would not eliminate these things necessarily, it would throw it into each school district to make that decision. So school boards, which are pretty powerful entities now, will become even more powerful if the Students Matter case flies. The dismissal, I mean, you know, we talked about tenure and seniority. The dismissal statutes, it is impossible to get rid of a bad teacher in the state. My last principal I worked for, told me she just wouldn't even bother. And if she wanted to, she could send a lemon, as they're called, to another school, but then she's got to take that lemon, and she'd rather deal with the lemon that she knows than the lemon she doesn't know. Now, this is shameful. SB 1530, State Senator Alex Padilla tried to shorten the dismissal statutes a little bit. We all want due process. Nobody's against due process here, but what we have is undue process. It is impossible to get rid of a bad teacher and a pedophile, as some recent cases, unfortunate cases you probably know about. So if we can make it a little bit easier to get rid of some teachers, get tenure, and get seniority out of the Ed Code, you will see some real reform in California. Throwing more money at a failing situation is not going to do it. Thank you.
I want to thank all the panelists for their insights, and I look forward to further conversation. Whether we agree or disagree, I think it's important that we're in the same room. A couple of points. I agree with Larry that there's a very significant case, Vegeta versus California. This is the case that's going to go to trial in January. What I think is going to happen, having served in the belly of the beast of the legislature in Sacramento, change reform is not going to come out of Sacramento. Political moneyed interests. California Teachers Association is the most powerful war chest in California. And there's a very close tie to the Democratic Party. I've seen it firsthand. Until Democrats finally have the backbone to stand up and say, we're not going to be led just simply because the money goes this way. We're going to put kids first. We'll keep seeing the squashing of legislation that we need to see in California, but right now can only be achieved via the courts. So that the third branch of government, which is of course the courts, is going to play a very important role as we go forward. With respect to the legislature, I do recognize that the teachers' union is not alone in blocking a reform. I would throw in the administrators, the superintendents, the school districts, which basically collect. I mean, kids are like debit cards, little button seat. They are the cha-ching that brings money into the district, and they don't want to rock the boat. The classified union. So as I sat in Sacramento and tried to push forward reform, I mean, Dean, I'm encouraged by what you have to say today, but I also think we can't just step back. We've been stepping back, as Terry said, for decades. Read A Nation at Risk, as Terry urged you to do, it's the same thing as today. So we don't have the time to step back. Even the encouraging progress of Kia, Dean, you mentioned 6 years. What kid spends more than 6 years in a particular branch of schooling? I mean, 6 years is more than the shelf life of a kid. So telling a parent to just step back and wait, it's not going to happen anymore. We need the urgency of now. I also think when I saw in Sacramento, I saw every reform No, 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 no. In terms of looking at LIFO, last in, first fired, seniority. You know what? I believe in tenure, but it has gone out of hand in K through 12. It takes 18 months in practice. Even the university system, it takes 7 years. So 18 months, essentially, 2 years on the books, to gain permanent status in California. That's got to change. When I tried passing incentive pay in California schools, and I limited it, I even said it could be collectively bargained between the union and the school district. Incentive pay to go in the lowest performing schools, including special education, to give bonus pay to those teachers who, quite frankly, are willing and capable to work with kids at school sites where, quite frankly, other teachers just don't want to go. You know what CTA said? No. They fought it every step of the way. Thankfully, United Teachers of Los Angeles, which is the teachers in LA, they broke from CTA and said, you know what, my God, we can do this. So at least on that one there was there. The parent trigger law. I'm glad to hear the discussion on looking more favorably at not just parent involvement, but parent rights to have a seat at the table and transform it. But at the time, it was just no. Open enrollment, no. So all of these things, trying to drop the firewall which exists in the California Code, which would prevent California from looking at teacher performance and doing a link to student outcomes, it was just no. So I think that, you know, the experience of serving in Sacramento, looking at the domination of political interests, and that's why I did, as a Democrat, as a liberal, as a union member, support Proposition 32, because until we break the special money ties that run the state of California, as Terry said, we're going to be here 30 years from now. This is going to take legislative reform, judicial reform, political campaign finance reform. It's going to take people standing up, regardless of which political spectrum we come from, and just saying, we're sick and tired of a failed education system. It's time for a change. It's half the state budget of the state of California. And it's contributing to the biggest prison system in this nation. If we do not educate, we will incarcerate, and if we don't change this system and give parents real choice to vote with their feet, then you know what? You can imagine the future of the great state of California.
Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, I share the Senator's urgency. Something's got to get done, and it's got to get done soon. But I would remind us, we're not building surfboards. You know, so the continual analogy to the business world and what's good for business, I think we got to be a little critical of that. We're talking about educating kids. We're talking about the heart connection between a teacher and a student. And you know what I mean. If you've been in a classroom, forget the classroom. If you ever learned anything from anybody, you know that there is a human part of it. And we got to figure out a way to move this system forward and to do it thoughtfully. But let's not forget that it is people coming together. First thing, this idea of throwing more money into a bad situation. If you throw more money into a situation and all you do is put the money there, you've done a disservice to the kids, to the people who work in that school, and a disservice to the community. And I think it's unfortunate that Mr. Sand had to be working in a school where they didn't have that kind of connection. But that's not the story of all QEIA schools. That's the story of the school he was in. We know, and you know, that if you bring people together and you spend the time necessary to be thoughtful about what it is you're trying to get done, and you work together not only with the faculty, but with management and with the community, and you come together with a plan, you can do the right thing and you can get things done, you can increase learning environments for kids. That is a fact, and we've seen it happen. I got to talk just a little bit about this parent trigger issue, okay? And absolutely true. We opposed it from the very beginning. And we still oppose the idea. Because here's what happens operationally in a community. I mean, I've never been there. I've just talked to the parents who signed a petition because somebody approached them and said, hey, sign this petition. We're going to get new books for the library. And they signed. Or sign this petition. We're going to paint the school. It's going to be so exciting. And they signed. And they found out what they signed was a thing that was going to change their school and move their faculty out. And I would imagine in some places that's actually a pretty good idea. But in some places it's awful. And one of the problems we have with this idea is if you're really trying to bring parents together, why not have some open town hall forums? Bring people together and say, look, this is what we're trying to do, and this is the way it's going to go, and these are what the 4 different options are. And you're going to be able to choose one at 50%. That's not the way this thing is working out in California. And I don't know what's happening in Texas, but I know when we find a couple people that are upset in the district and the Parent Trigger folks find out, or the Parent Revolution folks find out, all of a sudden you got 7 or 8 people moving into the community and renting a house and organizing out of that house and going into the community and saying whatever you got to say to get a petition signed. And we said, you know, is that really the best way to organize? I mean, really, if what you're trying to do is bring people together? Incredible. And in terms of getting rid of a teacher, like, I think 18 months is a little short. But you need to understand, for 18 months, a teacher is an at-will employee in a school district. And a building principal or an evaluator, what that means is you don't need an excuse. You don't need a reason to say you're not coming back. All you have to have is some opportunity to watch the teacher. And part of the predicament we have with teacher evaluation is we got a system that's kind of broken. And it needs to get fixed. And the California Teachers Association is committed to doing something about that. But it's going to have to be thoughtful. And it's going to have to engage the practitioners. Enough of that.
Okay, well, it's sort of unfortunate that everybody's piling on Dean. But, I mean, what else can I do, right? I am, but I think it's important to emphasize, I always do this in my classes as well, that, in the end, it might seem weird to say this, but it's not really about people. In my view, it doesn't make any difference who the president of the CTA is. Dean is here, he's the president of the CTA, but it didn't have to be him, it could have been somebody else. The thing is that it's not about Dean. It's about the fact that unions have an interest in jobs. Unions are about jobs. Now this doesn't mean that unions are bad, they just are what they are, right? There are lots of special interest groups out there. And unions are a special interest group that people join because they want their jobs protected. And that's what unions do. And it doesn't matter who the president is, or the vice president, or anybody else. Because basically, they do the same kinds of things. They protect jobs. Right? Okay. So, what's important, I think, always, is to focus not on what people say, but on what they do. What their organizations do. Right? And so, Dean has talked a lot about coming together, about people coming together. Okay, what does that really mean? Right? I'm willing to believe that he really believes this is an important thing, and we all believe that. Collaboration is good, cooperation is good. What does it really mean in politics? What it means is that if you have to collaborate, and the unions are part of the collaboration, then they're going to have a veto over everything that happens. Okay, so if you try to do something that they don't like, for instance, exercising a parent trigger, they will stop it. Because it's threatening to jobs. They don't want a school to leave the regular public school system and take money and jobs. Right? They're opposed to charter schools. They're opposed to the parent trigger. They're opposed to vouchers. Why? jobs. And why is that? It's not because they're bad, it's because that's their job. That's their job. They are in the business of protecting jobs. It's totally predictable. This is not, from their standpoint, it sounds terrible to say, they're an interest group. And their job is to protect jobs. And it turns out that those interests often come into conflict with the best interests of children. That is... Okay, so another point that he made, which I think is a perfectly reasonable one, is that, we should do everything we can to reform the regular public schools and get parents involved and so on, and try to make every school as good as it can possibly be, and so on. Well, yeah, we've been trying to do that for 30 years, right? There's something wrong here because it's not happening, right? So, okay, continue that. I think this is great. We should just continue that, but parents should have options, right? So, if they're trying to improve the regular public schools, but parents say, I don't think you guys are doing a very good job. I would like to go to this other school over here, this charter school. Fantastic, right? So they can improve their public schools as much as they want. But if parents have options and can leave, that changes everything. Right? So what we need, I think, is a serious school choice system that gives parents options to the regular public schools. Okay, so finally, when it comes to the money issue, I think this is a red herring. We are spending a fortune, really, on the public schools. It's taking a huge percentage of the California budget. The real problem is, and has always been, that a lot of the money gets wasted. So for instance, how do we pay teachers? Well, it has nothing to do with their performance. Who ever thought of this? Who thinks this is a good idea, right? So you pay teachers according to their seniority, which has nothing to do with how good they are in the classroom, and you pay them extra for master's degrees, which has nothing to do with how much students learn. It's been demonstrated over and over again. So why do they do that? They're wasting tons of money every year, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. When it comes to, say, layoff situations, well, that's a situation where it's an opportunity to lay off the least productive teachers. Do they do that? No. They just lay them off based on reverse seniority, and if there are young teachers who are fantastic in the classroom, they get fired. Okay, is this a good way to spend money? No. So it's really obvious that a lot of the money is getting wasted. This is not a money problem, it's an organization problem, and what we need is a system that allows us to organize the schools in the most productive ways, and the unions won't let us do that.